I want you to imagine a festival. But not just, a party or a parade. Imagine a scene so massive, so colorful, that people have called it a living Bible.
Hmm.
I mean, we're talking millions of people in the streets, rows literally carpeted with rich fabrics, and these ancient chants from the 6th century echoing off modern skyscrapers.
It's a spectacle
Yeah.
in every sense of the word. And what really pulls you in, I think, once you get past that initial
Yeah.
sensory overload of the sound and the color,
Uh-huh.
is that it's all a deeply theological reenactment.
Right. And we're talking about Timkat, the Ethiopian Orthodox celebration of Epiphany.
Exactly.
And for most of us in the West, when we hear Epiphany, we immediately think of the 3 wise men visiting baby Jesus. That's the image.
Sure, that's the standard story.
But in the Ethiopian tradition, and really in the Eastern tradition as a whole, Epiphany is all about the baptism. That one moment, Jesus steps into the Jordan River.
It is. And, on the surface, that story seems pretty simple. Jesus goes to the river, John baptizes him, a dove shows up, and that's it. But today we are doing a deep dive into a sermon by Dr. Rodas Andromeda. And his explanation is, well, it turns that simple event into what you could almost call a complex theological military operation.
A military operation. That is the perfect way to put it. So that's our mission for this deep dive, to unpack how Dr. Rodas decodes this. We're not just looking at the ritual, we're figuring out why it happens the way it does. Like, why did Jesus wait until he was exactly 30 years old? And we're going to get into this, frankly, wild story about a bill of debt hidden in the river.
Oh, that part is fascinating. It reads almost like ancient mythology.
It really does. And then we'll trace how centuries of Ethiopian emperors actually shaped the festival we see today. So it's a journey from, the very beginning of human origin stories right up to the streets of Addis Ababa now.
A huge synthesis of theology, history, and culture.
So let's jump in with that first mystery Dr. Rodas brings up. The timing. In our world, we love prodigies, right? The 30 under 30 lists.
Right.
But Jesus' baptism wasn't random. It wasn't at 20. It wasn't at 50. It had to be 30. Why is that specific number so important?
This is where we have to connect the New Testament right back to the very beginning of the Old. You really can't get the baptism without understanding Adam.
The first man.
The first man.
Mm-hmm.
So Dr. Rodas explains that in this tradition, Adam wasn't created as a baby.
Right. No awkward teenage years.
Exactly. He
Yeah.
just appears fully formed. And the theological consensus Dr. Rodas points to is that he appeared to be exactly 30 years old.
30.
30. In that ancient mindset, 30 is the age of fullness, of maturity. You're at the absolute peak of your potential.
So Adam starts the story at a biological 30.
Yes. And the source says that for 40 days, Adam was in this state of grace. He had what they call sonship, a perfect, direct relationship with God. But, well, we all know the story. He eats the forbidden fruit and loses that status.
He gets demoted.
He gets demoted. He loses his sonship. That's the key.
Okay, so fast forward thousands of years. Why does Jesus have to be 30?
Because, as Dr. Rodas argues, Jesus is the second Adam. It's a rescue mission. So to fix what the first Adam broke, he has to enter the timeline at the exact same point.
Wow.
By being baptized at 30, he's creating a perfect parallel to Adam's creation age. He's literally hitting the reset button.
That is such a cool concept. It's not just, I'm old enough now. It is a literal reclaiming of humanity's status. It's like he's saying, okay, I'm picking up exactly where you left off, but I'm going to get it right this time.
That's the core of it.
Yeah.
It is all about restoration. And what's so interesting is how he does it. It's not with this grand display of power. It's with, well, a shocking amount of humility.
Oh, right. The dynamic with John the Baptist. I love this part of the source because it reframes the whole picture. You have Jesus, God incarnate, walking all the way from Galilee to the Jordan.
Not a shore walk.
Not at all. And he's going to see John, who is, his servant.
Dr. Rodas uses a great modern analogy here. He says, think about a king or a prime minister today. If they want a religious service, what happens?
You summon the priest. Come to the palace.
Exactly. Bring the church to me. But Jesus just flips that completely on its head. He's the one who travels. He goes to the servant, setting this precedent that your rank, even divinity, doesn't excuse you from humility.
He goes to the river. He doesn't make the river come to him. And speaking of the river,
Yeah.
we have to talk about the Jordan.
Yes.
Because Dr. Rodas is very specific. Why Jordan? I mean, there are nicer bodies of water around. The Sea of Galilee is right there. It's bigger. It's cleaner.
Right.
Why this, muddy little river?
It's true. It's not the Nile. But the Jordan has this specific, almost mythical significance. And that brings us to what Dr. Rodas calls the bill of debt.
Okay, let's unpack this, because when I read this, I thought I was in a fantasy novel, a literal bill.
It's a really deep piece of theological folklore. but it explains the location perfectly. So the story goes that after Adam and Eve were expelled from paradise, they were in total despair.
And vulnerable.
Very vulnerable. And in that moment, the devil approaches them and basically offers them a deal. The tradition says they signed a bond of servitude to him to reduce their suffering.
A contract with the devil, the oldest story there is.
Literally. And the devil, wanting to lock this down, splits the contract in two. He hides one copy in hell.
And the other copy.
He throws it into the Jordan River, buries it deep in the water under the rocks so it can never be found.
Whoa. Okay, so the Jordan isn't just a river. It's a crime scene. It's where the evidence of humanity's slavery is hidden.
Precisely. And that's why Jesus has to go there. It's a strategic strike. By physically stepping into that river, he's going in to find and destroy that document. Dr. Rodas says he melted the record of debt.
That completely changes the image of the baptism. It's not a gentle washing. It's a search and destroy mission. He's deleting the blackmail file.
It is. And Dr. Rodas points to Psalm 114, which says, the Jordan turned back. The interpretation is that the river itself was afraid. It recognized its creator had come to break the bond.
And in doing that, he also transforms water itself, right? The source makes this really interesting point about Noah.
Yes, this is beautiful. Think about the flood. In that story, water was an instrument of wrath. It meant death.
Right. Being underwater was bad.
Very bad. But by entering the Jordan, Jesus blesses the element of water. He converts it. It goes from a tool of destruction to a womb of life, the baptismal font. Now, when you go under the water, you aren't drowning. You're being reborn.
Oh, wow. Turning a weapon into a womb, that is a heavy concept.
And it's why water is so central to Timkat today. The water they spray on the crowds isn't just for fun. It's that blessed converted water.
Okay, so we have the age 30 to reset Adam. We have the River Jordan to destroy the debt. Now we have to look up the heavens open, the Father speaks, and the Holy Spirit comes down as a dove.
Famous dove.
But Dr. Rodas asks, why a dove? Why not an eagle or something more powerful?
Right. It's a great question. And he has a very specific list of reasons. The first one is fascinating. He said the dove has no bile.
No bile. You mean the digestive fluid?
Yes. In ancient symbolism, bile represents bitterness, anger, holding a grudge. So to be without bile means you are without vengeance. The Spirit comes with pure forgiveness, not malice.
That is such a cool biological, theological link. It's a signal. This isn't a god of punishment.
Exactly. He also notes how doves protect their young, symbolizing the Spirit's protection. And then there's the big one, the one that connects back to Noah again.
The olive branch.
The olive branch. In Noah's story, the dove signals the flood is over. Peace has returned. Here, the dove signals the flood of sin is over. It's a message of mercy.
So every single element, the age, the water, the bird, it's all calling back to an older story and basically rewriting the ending.
That's a perfect way to put it. It's a total rewriting of human history.
So that's the theology, that's the why. But now I want to get to the how. How do we get from a quiet moment in a river 2,000 years ago to the massive, joyous festival of Timkat we see today? The source material gets into some really interesting history here.
No, it wasn't built in a day. It evolved over centuries, with different emperors and saints, each adding a new layer.
It seems like it all starts with the sound.
It does. You have to go back to the 6th century, to Saint Yared and Emperor Gabriel Meskel. Saint Yared is the father of the Ethiopian chant. The hymns, the rhythm you hear today, it all starts there. He set the sonic tone.
But the big processions, the crowds moving through the streets, that comes later.
Much later. Dr. Rodas points to the 12th century, to King Lalibela.
The king who built those incredible rock-hewn churches.
The very same.
Yeah.
During his reign, a holy man named Abune Jebri Menfez Kidas encouraged all the different churches to gather together at water sources to bless the rivers collectively.
Ah, so it becomes a community event, not just something happening inside one church.
Exactly, it gets bigger. But the specific rules, the real structure of the modern festival, that comes in the 15th century with Emperor Zara Yaqob.
What did he do?
He's the one who established what's known as Ketera. He made it a rule that the Tabots, and we should probably explain what those are.
Right, the tabot. It's a replica of the Ark of the Covenant that's in every single church. It's the holiest object they have.
And it's almost never seen. It's kept covered. So Zara Yaqob decrees that on a specific day, the Tabots must leave the churches.
And this symbolizes Jesus leaving Galilee to go to the Jordan.
Precisely. But Zara Yaqob added a twist. He said they shouldn't just take the shortest path to the water. They had to process through the land.
Why? Just for the pageantry.
To bless the country. The idea is that the tabot sanctifies the very ground it passes over. It turns a religious ritual into a national blessing.
So the Ark of the Covenant is literally moving through your neighborhood. That explains the carpets on the street.
Exactly. You lay down carpet so the priests carrying this holy object don't walk on the bare ground. It's a sign of ultimate reverence. And today, Dr. Rodas says, you see this incredible pageantry with special chariots built for the Tabots.
And he specifically praises the youth, right?
He does. He says the young people are the ones carrying the whole thing forward now, decorating the streets, singing the songs. It's a tradition that's 1,500 years old, but it's very much alive.
There's that great line he mentions, that cultural saying, "A dress not worn for Timkat should be torn."
The Timkat Yelkoni Kemisi Batates. It's a famous Amharic saying.
It sounds a little harsh. Tear it up.
It is. But it shows you how important this day is. It means if you have a beautiful outfit and you save it, you don't wear it for Timkat. What's the point of even having it? This is the day. You show up in your absolute best.
It's the main event, not Christmas, not Easter necessarily. Timkat is when the entire community shines.
Absolutely.
So if we recap this whole journey, we start with Adam at age 30, losing his grace. Then Jesus at 30, stepping in to restore it.
Right.
We have this secret contract of debt hidden in the Jordan River that gets destroyed.
The search and destroy mission.
And then we have literally centuries of emperors building that moment into a massive festival where the Ark of the Covenant tours the country to bless the land.
It's a huge synthesis. It connects the very beginning of time to right now.
You know, there's one final image from Dr. Rodas that I think we should leave everyone with. It's about the opened heavens.
Yes, this is the real takeaway for the believer.
He says that at the moment of baptism, the heavens, which had been closed since Adam, were thrown open. The spiritual doors were unlocked, access was restored.
Mm-hmm.
And when you see those crowds at Timkat, all the joy, the water being sprayed, you realize something.
What's that?
For them, this isn't just remembering something that happened 2,000 years ago. They believe that by being there, they are standing under those same opened heavens. The sky is open for them right now.
It makes you think about all the rituals in our own lives, doesn't it?
Yeah.
For the people at Timkat, the ritual is the reality. It's a living link to that moment.
A living Bible, just like you said at the start. It's scripture you can walk around in.
Exactly.
Well, that is a lot to think about. What a beautiful picture. Thanks for helping us unpack all of that.
My pleasure. It's a story worth telling.
And for you listening, the next time you see a photo of those incredible crowds in Ethiopia, remember, they're not just walking to a river. They're walking to destroy a debt and open the sky. We'll see you on the next deep dive.